Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we've got some builds to take a look at. That's right, builds, plural. Now originally, I was trying out an Umbra setup in the background footage of a few of my recent videos, and I got a flood of questions asking for the breakdown. So I had planned to do that, but then I tried another setup and a different one, and I realized Umbra is a very popular set to use in PvP right now. I have never dabbled with it a ton before, so why not present 3 viable loadouts using it so that people have some options to draw inspiration from. And so, that's exactly what we're doing today. I've had a lot of fun and success with Umbra in PvP lately, so I want to share with you all what's worked for me in the DZ and Conflict. Very important to keep a few things in mind. As always, these builds are not the definitive versions of what works. These setups have worked well for me, but that doesn't mean that some tweaks and changes to them won't work better for you. But with that said, I don't want to take up too much time as we've got all 3 loadouts to cover. So if you end up enjoying the video and you want to see more, then be sure to click that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on the latest, and let's go. Alright, for build number 1, we've got the loadout that sparked the creation of this entire video. Had all the questions coming in about what this setup was, and it's the reason that I felt compelled to try out Umbra in the first place. As always, I want to stress I did not create the concept of this build myself. Using the Iron Lung with Umbra was a popular setup many months ago, still is now, but this is my own personal twist on it, and I've enjoyed it a lot. The basic idea here is not to go fully glass cannon to be able to stand toe-to-toe with an enemy, but at the same time leaning into Conflict's stealth capability specifically, given the lack of a radar, to excel at high burst damage, surprise attacks, and in general just spewing out unending bullets. It really is a powerhouse in damage and control of the battlefield once you learn the gun, learn the timing of your Umbra stacks, and all of that. So, there's a lot to like here. Let's get into the breakdown. Alright, so here it is. Let's start out with the gear, specifically Umbra, because that is the centerpiece of this entire thing. I'm going to assume that most of you know what Umbra does, but you get the 15% crit chance on the 2-piece, 30% reload on the 3, and then the 4. When you go into cover, you get stacks that give you extra rate of fire and crit damage, and then when you're out, you get stacks that give you more armor regen when you go back into cover. Primarily what we're focusing on for this particular setup is the damage aspect of that to feed into the Iron Lung LMG, which we'll get to shortly. So I am using the Umbra chest piece that gives us increased amount of those damage stacks. And then in total, I have Umbra on the chest, gloves, knee pads, and holster. That makes up my 4 pieces. I also have 3 blue cores and 3 red cores. That is the distribution on here. That feeds into what I was saying in the little intro bit about how this isn't fully glass cannon, but it does lean into a lot of damage, and you see that very well in the gameplay. To reinforce that, I am using the Coyote's Mask Exotic, and this is because this build is primarily for the usage of Conflict, and I think that having the fullest amount of crit that you can have now that they've removed shade levels from that experience is really valuable. So I try and hover right around 50% crit chance, and that means that a lot of the time I'll be getting close to the cap and then just well over like 200% crit damage with full Umbra stacks, and that works really well with the LMG. Again, we'll get to that shortly. Last piece, I have a Walker in here's backpack. Now, if you have one with these correct rolls, that is the Petrov brand, that will actually get you more damage. I just didn't have one. This is what I'm running for now. Because, yeah, we're focusing on the LMG as our primary. We have weapon damage, crit chance mod with vigilance on here. And once again, leaning towards damage but not full glass cannon. This gives us a lot of damage that we can take advantage of with the lack of a radar in Conflict. You can keep the uptime on this a lot higher, and it spikes your damage by a lot. Speaking of crit, that is what we have everywhere on every piece. Crit damage, crit chance, whatever you need to get that up to, again, 50% value is what I like when I'm running Coyotes. If we skip over to the stats here, you'll see that it's like this right now because I am accounting for the lack of shade stats within Conflict. So I'm at around 50% crit chance. My crit damage is then that gets boosted by Umbra, by Coyotes, depending on what distance you're engaging the enemy at. It's a really good distribution. And then lastly, like I said, the star of the show is the Iron Lung itself. Now, you do not have to run the Iron Lung, but I do highly recommend it. It's got really good base stats. It did get a buff with Project Resolve, and its talent of being able to light enemies on fire just works super well with Umbra. Because you spike the rate of fire so much, you increase your damage output, and then if the enemy can't shoot back at you, it's almost a guaranteed death for them in a 1v1 scenario. So this gun just works super well, and as I think you see in the gameplay, there's just not much of a better option. For the skills, totally up to you. I like the Revive 5 now that it's a faster amount, especially if I'm engaging enemies at a longer distance. There's a greater chance that I can actually get up, so that's pretty nice. Using a jammer for Conflict, if I were in the DZ, I'd probably swap this to a decoy, but the decoy doesn't really give you any advantage within Conflict, so I don't run it there. And then lastly, Firewall Specialization purely for the strength of its armor kit, but use whatever you like there. That was a look at the pieces. Here's some raw gameplay of it in action.
5 minutes left. Victory is near. Don't let up now.
Alright, moving on to build number 2. After using the first Umbra variation for a while, I started to feel the desire for something a bit more mobile, something that could handle firefights better and just be more pliable to the situation at hand. And that is when I came up with this puppy. It shares a similar framework to the first variation, but some key changes have been made to allow this to play as a much more frontliner kind of role, most notably with our weapon featuring significantly faster reloads and easier handling, with our damage talents increasing their uptime to be able to kick in even under fire, and with our exotic pick leaning towards a better blend of survivability and damage. This one is a ton of fun as well. Let's take a closer look. Alright, now here is build number 2. Like I said, similar framework to the first one, but a few key differences. To point those out, once again, we have our 4 pieces of Umbra in those same 4 slots. Also, again, using the chest piece for those maximum damage stacks. I have added 1 additional blue core. I have 4 blues and 2 reds on this, just because we're leaning a bit more into that aggressive playstyle. It helps to just have that little bit of extra armor. But here are the changes. Instead of Coyote's Mask, we're running the Catharsis Exotic Mask. This gives us a great blend, like I said, of survivability and damage. I just love how this plays in PvP combat, specifically in conflict. It's really nice. Of course, we do lose out on weapon damage and some crit rolls on there, but I think it's worth it for the kind of benefit you get, the protection against things like status effects, the fact that you can ramp up those damage stacks as well. It's just really good. Additionally, while we are again using a Walker and Hero's backpack, if you have a Fenris one with this, that'll be better. It'll get you more damage. We have switched our talent to Companion, and what this allows us to do is we get a bit less damage than Vigilance, but we can keep the uptime on it even when we're under enemy fire, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to play more aggressively, as I do with this build. And the last major change is our primary going from the Iron Lung to the St. Elmo's engine. Now this gun, everybody knows, is incredibly good. It also is really nice for conflict specifically, even though I have used this a lot in the DZ, because you can build up crit so effectively with those two 20% mods on each value. And so if we take a look at the total crit on this, again, this is currently set up for the DZ, so I have 56% there, 146% there. If you go into conflict, just keep in mind that you're going to lose 10% crit chance, so you want to build that back up with mods. But that's roughly what you're looking at right there. And again, I just have crit on every single piece where it's applicable. For the mods, whatever distribution you need to get to the cap, that's what I recommend. And again, the St. Elmo's is not required for this kind of setup. If you want to run a different high-end AR, you can. If you want to run something like the Eagle Bear, you can. It's just very reliable in its handling, in its rate of fire. Its magazine size works really well with how fast you shoot with Umbra. And I feel less bad about using it now in PvP, given that if we switch to the PvP stats, you now only get 50% of the magazine as shock ammo. It's still incredibly strong when you do get that shock ammo, but having only 35 rounds of it, I think makes it a bit more fair, a bit more acceptable to use in gameplay. So yeah, it's a really good option here. Lastly, for our skills, I have a Stinger Hive on here. Again, if I were going to go into the DZ, I might replace this with a decoy, but the Stinger is really nice in conflict. The Explosive Seeker Mine is my favorite skill to use when running Companion, because it will follow you around for over 2 minutes, so you pretty much constantly have this active, and then if you need to send it out at someone, you get a nice stagger off of the explosion. And once again, I have Firewall as my specialization because it is just too good with the armor kit. That's pretty much the only reason I use it. Alright, that was your breakdown, and again, here's a look at some more raw gameplay.
Rogue agent neutralized. Landmark engaged. Rogue explosive seeker mine detected. Hostile explosive seeker mine detected. The enemy has acquired a boost. And the enemy has acquired the boost. Agent down. Rogue Stinger Hive detected. Hostile Stinger Hive detected. Rogue explosive seeker mine detected. Hostile explosive seeker mine detected.
Alright, last but not least, build number 3. At this point, after making the first 2 loadouts, I was kind of on a roll. I had 2 setups I liked, and I was deep into the theory crafting and experimentation of it all. I thought, what could I do with Umbra that I haven't already? And you know that moment where you have an idea, figure it wouldn't really work in practice, but you try it out and it actually does work? That's pretty much exactly what happened here. I tried an off-meta gun, scrapped any direct damage talents outside of Umbra, and yet, somehow, this thing smacks players around while touting more armor than any other variation in the video. So, needless to say, this wildcard third build has been a lot of fun. Let's dive deeper into the pieces. Alright, and here it is. Like I said, probably some stuff that you wouldn't expect, specifically the primary, but we'll get to it. Once again, let's start with Umbra. 3 pieces here because we are using the ninja bike, so we get 4 in total. And again, using the chest piece to be able to get those maximum damage stacks. That's kind of, I don't want to say required, but it's very good on the majority of Umbra builds you're going to set up just because of the insane bonuses you get from it. We then have the other 2 pieces on the holster and knee pads, and we do have 5 blues on this build as opposed to the 3 and 4 on the previous 2. So this has the most amount of armor, but it still puts out an insane amount of damage, and a lot of that comes from the ninja bike backpack that we are using. This of course gives you the +1 to any gear or brand set that you run, and SMGs work super well with that because specifically you get the Sokolov. The first 2 bonuses are incredibly relevant to any damage build. You get SMG damage and crit damage there, and then we're using 1 piece of Walker and Harris to get that multiplicative bonus of the 5% damage to armor, as well as of course the flat weapon damage. And this all contributes to our primary of the tactical UMP45. Now again, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, what are you using? What is in your hands? Listen, I'm not ashamed to say it. I like this gun. I always have, but it's not very viable, right? It's not the best gun out there. However, it has always had one of the highest base damages, but it also, because of that, has one of the slowest firing rate of fires for an SMG. But because Umbra boosts that by so much, what is it, like 30% or more, it turns into something really strong, and we're using measured on here, and as you saw in the gameplay, and as you'll see after this too, it just shreds through players. That's simply all it does. So in no way are you required to use this if you want to try this kind of a setup. You could very easily run the Lady Death, Vector, I don't know, the Banshee, anything you want. But I do recommend you try this out because it's a lot of fun, and I think the sheer amount of damage that you get from this gun combined with the insane rate of fire that we get from Umbra and Measured, it's a lot of fun, and it's quite surprisingly strong. As with the rest of them, you're putting crit on every single piece here to be able to get a good distribution. This is currently set up for conflict, so we're going over the amount that we would need because the shade bonuses are removed when you go in there. But whatever distribution you need to get up to the max there, that's what you want. And then I also have just crit damage mods too on the gun right there. For the skills, again, whatever is going to work best in conflict or DZ, I would probably swap one of these to a decoy if I'm running in the DZ. Otherwise, these are good for conflict. And for one last time, still using the firewall specialization for the armor kit, but we also get the extra bonus because we're using a high-end gun on this one that we can put the 10% crit damage mod on the underbarrel, and that is a very worthwhile bonus. And one more time, here's some additional raw gameplay of it in action.
Back online. Boost online. Rogue explosive seeker mine detected. Hostile explosive seeker mine detected. Rogue defender drone detected. Hostile defender drone detected. An agent needs assistance.
And there you have it, folks. Those are 3 highly effective and quite lethal Umbra builds that I've been using across the DZ and Conflict. Really pleased with the outcome of all of this. If you've been around for a while, you might recall me saying at certain points that Umbra wasn't really my cup of tea, and it's not. Typically, I don't really enjoy sets or builds that require a lot of micromanaging for stacks or other conditions. In this case, it's of course the in and out of cover nature of Umbra's functionality. But after using it for a little bit, seeing the power it offers, the set is a ton of fun. So whether you go off of one of the variants I showed here, or you create your own, I sincerely hope you'll give Umbra a shot if you haven't before, and I hope you enjoy it if you do. Do let me know down below any thoughts on everything we went over, which build version you liked best, what your favorite Umbra loadout is, whatever you're thinking, would love to hear it. But that's going to do it for me today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Ow.